Hello and welcome to Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. The European Union and United States are closing in on a trade deal, according to a Financial Times report. The agreement would impose 15% tariffs on European imports.
Transatlantic trade is valued at hundreds of billions of euros and is seen as one of the most important commercial relationships in the world. Washington and Brussels are reportedly close to a deal that would impose 15% tariffs on European imports, while tariffs on some products, including aircraft, spirits and medical devices, would be waived. Previously, President Donald Trump threatened to impose a 30% tariff on goods from the EU.
The major players in the world are applied with a tariff of 25% or higher, where 30% would make EU disadvantage in this already bad situation, and 15% is much better. In fact, given the change in the relative structure of the tariffs, it might in fact shift some of the trades from other US trade partners to the EU. But overall, the whole exercise is trade deteriorating.
Despite this, the impact of the tariffs on Poland and the broader Central European region is expected to be relatively small compared to the rest of the EU.
Most of the exports of those countries are destined at the rest of the EU rather than outside of the EU.
And while according to reports, the EU-US agreement to settle for 15% tariffs is in the works, the EU continues to prepare a possible €93 billion package of retaliatory tariffs, set up to 30%, in case it cannot agree to a deal with Washington by August 1st.
4 civilians have been killed and over 30 other people injured after Russia launched a wave of attacks on Ukraine over the past 24 hours.
3 people were killed in Kharkiv region and 1 in the Kherson region, but the attacks targeted multiple areas of the country. In the Cherkasy region, at least 7 people were injured, while some 300 graves at the local cemetery were destroyed in the attack, causing outrage.
What happened here today is simply a mockery of the memory of our parents, our grandparents, and those people who are buried here. Russians are simply scum. I can't think of any other way to describe these people who give orders to shoot at these places.
In Odessa, Russian drones damaged a UNESCO-protected landmark, the Privoz market, the city's largest food market. Local residents reported on their experiences surviving the attack.
It's horrible. It's scary when you don't know where it's going. Thank God we're alive. Our cats are alive too, although they're scared. I went down to the 3rd floor and the shockwave went through the whole building. Then I ran out of the front door and saved myself. I just knew that it was flying toward the building and that in literally a minute I would have been gone. Thank God I was saved.
The Donetsk and Zaporizhia regions were also targeted in the attacks. These Russian strikes come as a 3rd round of peace talks between delegations from Moscow and Kiev concluded on Wednesday. There, the 2 sides agreed to exchange 1,200 prisoners of war each.
The Russian offensive in eastern Ukraine shows no signs of slowing down, with Pokrovsk being a key target. Russian forces are encircling the city and sabotage groups have begun penetrating Ukrainian lines and crossing into urban areas. According to military sources, Pokrovsk and its surrounding areas are under constant pressure. Unlike other fronts where Russian forces have occasionally halted due to heavy losses, the assault near Pokrovsk remains aggressive and sustained. Ukrainian forces are repelling the attacks, with reports indicating a high number of Russian casualties. Moscow's forces, however, are steadily closing in on the city, which serves as an important logistical hub for many sectors of the front line in Donetsk, raising fears of its capture. The U.S. has approved 2 potential arms sales to Ukraine totaling over $300 million as President Donald Trump's approach to the war evolves. The new packages aim to bolster Ukraine's defensive capabilities amid intensifying Russian attacks. The deal includes the possible provision of medium-range surface-to-air missile systems to bolster Ukraine's air defenses, as well as infantry fighting vehicles to help Kyiv maintain combat readiness. The move comes as Donald Trump, once openly critical of military aid to Ukraine, recalibrates his approach to the war. As the conflict drags on, with Russia maintaining unrelenting drone and missile attacks and repeatedly rejecting Trump's ceasefire proposals, the U.S. president appears to have significantly shifted his position on both Ukraine and Putin. The European Union is calling on Ukraine to roll back its crackdown on the country's anti-corruption bureaus after Kyiv passed a new bill effectively ending their independence. In response to the move, Ukrainians have taken to the streets in the largest protests since Russia's full-scale invasion began. In an exclusive interview with TVP World, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski says Ukraine will not make it into the EU if it's a corrupt country. His statement was echoed by the EU Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Kos. Here's more.
The fastest way for Ukraine to lose the support both of the EU and the member states and the publics in member states is to go back to the bad old days of corruption. As a corrupt country, Ukraine will not make it into the EU. We have to be convinced that the authorities from top to bottom are determined to stamp out corruption.
So as a neighbour of Ukraine, do you feel that the raids in this new bill are political overreach, or, as the authorities are saying, that there could be evidence to suggest there are Russian spies, Russian infiltration?
I'm sure there are all kinds of shenanigans. We sympathize with Ukraine's resistance against Russian aggression, so it is up to President Zelensky to fix this.
And Commissioner, I want to ask you the same question. Is this new bill political overreach? Or have you seen evidence, have you seen suggestions that this claim, the suggestion that there's Russian infiltration could prove true?
I don't know about the rationale why these steps have been made. I can only interpret together with my team in Brussels what we got. And what we got is that actually the independence of the agencies is now being threatened or has been abolished. So, but you know, in my opinion, the institutions itself are not enough.
A new wave of protests has broken out across Ukraine in response to President Zelensky's controversial decision to sign a bill curtailing the power and independence of the country's key anti-corruption agencies. The law, approved by the Ukrainian parliament and signed by the president on Tuesday, has sparked widespread outrage. Demonstrations took place in major cities across Ukraine, including Kyiv, Lviv, Dnipro and Odessa on Wednesday and Thursday, as thousands of Ukrainians voiced their opposition to the new legislation. The law grants the Prosecutor General sweeping powers over the country's specialized anti-corruption prosecutor's office and the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. Its critics say it undermines the independence of these crucial institutions and argues the law does nothing to target Russian agents, but instead consolidates control in the hands of the Prosecutor General. Protesters, many of whom are young people too young to have participated in the 2014 Euromaidan protests, see this move as a direct threat to the democratic gains made since Ukraine's revolution. There were no survivors of the passenger plane crash in Russia's eastern region of Amur, according to the TASS news agency. 49 people were on board the aircraft. The burning wreckage of the Hungary Airlines AN-24 plane was found in the region of Amur on Thursday after it disappeared from flight radars. The flight dropped off radar while approaching its destination of Tinda, a town near the Russia-China border. Regional Governor Vasily Orlov said that according to preliminary data, there were 43 passengers, including 5 children and 6 crew members on board. Russian imperialism isn't limited to Ukraine, says Volodymyr Yermolenko, editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld.org, commenting on the aftermath of the most recent round of peace talks in Istanbul. In an interview for TVP World, Yermolenko highlighted that despite deadlines and threats of harsh sanctions, Russia's expansionist ambitions are deeply rooted in its imperial ideology.
We'll see what will happen in early September when Trump's kind of deadline will will expire of 50 days, but there were lots of other deadlines, and nothing really has happened. And I think even if Americans decide to impose very harsh sanctions, which, as we know, there is a bill on them in the Congress, I don't think that Russia will try to find a compromise, because in the Russian ideology right now, in the Putinist ideology, every compromise is a weakness, and Russians want to proceed to expand militarily, to get new territories. Why? It's another question. Why they need these territories, nobody knows. But I think it's in their in the psychology of the Russian imperialism today, and I think it doesn't limit to Ukraine only. We see lots of things around the Baltic states, or now around Azerbaijan or Kazakhstan, or around Europe, because Russia really wants to come back to the world order where it controlled the half of Europe as after the Second World War.
European Council President Antonio Costa called on China to use its influence on Russia to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. Speaking to Chinese President Xi Jinping, European officials added that EU-China relations have reached an inflection point and must be rebalanced.
As a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, we call on China to use its influence on Russia to respect the United Nations Charter and to bring an end to its war on aggression against Ukraine.
We have reached an inflection point. Rebalancing our bilateral relation is essential, because to be sustainable, the relations need to be mutually beneficial. And to achieve this, it is vital for China and Europe to acknowledge our respective concerns and come forward with real solutions.
The more complex and challenging the international situation becomes, the more China and Europe need to strengthen communication, enhance mutual trust and deepen cooperation, so as to contribute greater stability and certainty to the world through a steady and healthy China-Europe relationship.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán met with his Romanian counterpart Ilie Bolojan on Wednesday. The officials shared an informal dinner in Bucharest. A new beginning, that's what Orbán called the meeting in a post on X. It was the first meeting between the current prime ministers of Hungary and Romania and could signal a thaw in relations between the two countries, which are now run by governments of opposite political orientations. The Hungarian prime minister is also expected to deliver a speech at the Tus-Vanyos gathering this Saturday. Held annually in Transylvania, which is now part of Romania but belonged to Hungary before World War I, the gathering focuses on dialogue between Hungarians and the country's diaspora. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk is receiving astronaut Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski right now in Warsaw. The meeting comes just a week after he completed his mission on the International Space Station. The Polish astronaut was on board the ISS for 2 weeks along with 3 other crew members of the Axiom 4 mission. During his stay, he carried out numerous experiments that were a part of the Polish INGIS research program. The AX-4 mission marked the second time a Pole has been sent to space. Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski was preceded by Mirosław Hermaszewski, who flew to space in 1978 on board the Soyuz 30 spacecraft. And this wraps up Midday Report here on TVP World. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more on our channel. Goodbye.